Paul Ayers. Paul is a longtime member of the society, and he's been very good to us over the years. He's donated a number of artifacts, and he has a great presentation for you tonight. It's all yours, Paul.
Well, I don't know about a great presentation. Hey, guys. All right. So the name of this thing is Unpacking the Packing House, a history of the Orange Empire in North San Fernando Valley. Does anybody here know what I'm going to be talking about tonight? Everybody here from the Valley? Yeah. Okay, so you remember when the Valley was full of oranges, right? Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about. But before we talk about that, we got to talk about how the oranges came to Southern California in the first place. Oranges didn't come to San Fernando Valley until the second decade of the 20th century, around 1913, 1915. But they came to Southern California much earlier. And originally, the big citrus belt in Southern California was from Pasadena on the west to San Bernardino and Riverside Redlands on the east. And it all came from two trees that were stolen from Brazil in 1873. They're Washington navels. They were brought to Washington, D.C., and a couple of people in Riverside went to L.A. on a buckboard, got two of them, and brought them out to Riverside and planted them. And then those cuttings from those trees became the great naval orchards of the Inland Empire. All navels that you eat nowadays all came from those two trees. Genetically, they're all the same because you don't grow citrus from seed. You take cuttings and graft it onto a better stock. So in the 1880s, 1890s, there were many of these small farms, mostly run by retired lawyers from the east or people who had consumption and moved here. And they had all these orchards, and they saw it as gentleman farmer kind of approach, so they would dress like that. That's not true. They actually had Chinese and Japanese doing it for them. But they created this fantasy of a beautiful citrus empire, where the family would all, harvest the trees themselves. And this is what they looked like. A lot of diversity in that picture, huh?
They look like humans, not
Well, I don't know. They look like a bunch of old white people to me. At any rate, this gave birth to the whole fantasy of oranges and snow, and the idea to the Easterners that whenever you went to California, this is what you saw. But the reality was a little different. The growers were disorganized, and they were taken advantage of by the distributors. So by the 1890s, they decided they had to do something about it, and it became the first great innovation in the citrus industry in Southern California, which was sun-kissed. Now we know it as sun-kissed. In reality, it was the California Fruit Growers Exchange. That's what its name was until the 1950s. But what I'm talking to you about, I'm just going to call it sun-kissed because that's what everybody knows about it. The innovation of sun-kissed was to take all the growers, organize them in local associations and exchanges, then distribute the fruit through their own jobbers and retailers to consumers in the United States. And in doing so, they made an incredible industrial process of the orange industry. So instead of little packing houses throughout Southern California, you had these big industrial packing houses where women mostly packed the oranges for shipping to the United States and beyond. For instance, Sunkist is the first Sunkist shipment to London. Now, Sunkist didn't only innovate in terms of processing the orange industry, they also innovated in marketing the orange industry. Most of us don't know that before the 20th century, oranges were primarily a Christmas tree. It was something you gave at Christmas. And people would not eat oranges every day. So Sunkist set out to make oranges an everyday product. And one of their first big pushes was in 1908. This was the advertisement for Iowa Day, for Orange Week in Iowa. They shipped a whole bunch of oranges out there, made them really cheap, and flooded the area with these kind of handbills. So, and then as time progressed, they used glossy magazines to sell the idea of sun-kissed oranges. Oops. That they were tender, healthful, delicious, served by this cute little girl. And in the background, the Ramona image of Spanish-Mexican California that never really existed. They also worked with the retailers to present the fruit in a very attractive manner. Sunkist, on its own, created orange juice. Before 1920, people didn't drink orange juice. Imagine that. But because navels are a winter fruit, and Valencias, which are the juice orange, are a summer fruit, they decided to create orange juice as a way of marketing Valencias. And you may not know this, but most of the oranges grown in the San Fernando Valley were Valencia oranges, not navels. So they single-handedly created an orange juice with this kind of advertisement, again, with the mission in the background. And they also made it easy for you to do juicing by creating little machines like this and selling them to you at cost. So these were the great marketing innovations of Sunkist. So by the time the valley was ready to become an orange growing area, Sunkist was in place to direct it, market it, and process it. Let's talk about what the valley was before the orange boom. The valley is basically a semi-arid plain. There is indigenous water, mostly underground, mostly flowing from north to south. Before the introduction of outside water to the valley, farming in the valley was dry land. That means that it was dependent on rainfall, and as such it was primarily in grains, wheat. This is out in the Lancashire grounds above North Hollywood, or hay. Even by the 20th century, it was still in dry land farming. As you can see, there's an 8-mule team out there plowing, getting ready to plant wheat, probably some grain. But by the second decade of the 20th century, the vital ingredients that were going to create the Orange Empire started to come together. The primary one was water. Oranges need a lot of water. They can't get by on little wells, although there were some in San Fernando. Needed a lot of water to turn the valley into what it became. That was a problem because indigenous water was spotty and localized, but that all changed on November 5th, 1913, when the aqueduct was opened. And all of a sudden there was plenty of water, albeit stolen, to make the valley turn into the agricultural powerhouse it was. This is from the brochure that was handed out at the time of the aqueduct opening. And as you can see, they've already planted the water mains to go all through the valley to deliver the water. The last thing that they needed at that point was annexation, and that was accomplished in 1950 when the rural parts of the valley were annexed into Los Angeles, and then the water became available to them. The second thing they needed, and here's the water coming into the orange groves, the second thing they needed was processing. There was a packing house in San Fernando as of 1895, but it was small and only moved a little bit of citrus. And actually the citrus was further west, so new packing houses were built. The first one was the San Fernando Lemon Association up here where next to where the mission is now. I bet a lot of people here remember that building. I certainly do. And then the second was the San Fernando Heights Orange Association, which my family is greatly associated with. The third,
Where was that one
you
located?
can't talk to me while I'm doing the show.
Oh.
You can ask me afterwards. Transportation was the third thing that they needed. And that was provided, happily, by the Pacific Electric. Pacific Electric ran their line in from Van Nuys to San Fernando in 1913. Anybody know where this picture is taken? That's Chatsworth looking east at Sepulveda. So that's Chatsworth there. The sign here says San Fernando Mission. This one says Van Nuys. The Pacific Electric line ran right past the packing house. There's the San Fernando Heights Orange Association. Here's a sign for Granada, which was the original name for Granada Hills. And then up to San Fernando, where it met with the SP and could get loaded on SP trains that went to Los Angeles or to San Francisco. The Orange Empire. Once the water was there, once the processing was there, it was time to plant the groves. This is a Sunshine Ranch, which is at Rinaldi and Shoshone. These buildings are still there if you know where to look. But you can see this entire ranch was planted in citrus by 1920. These are the citrus plantings as of 1940. You see most of it was in the area of Balboa, Devonshire, Sepulveda, and Rinaldi. But it actually went all the way out to Topanga as well. This is what the valley looked at in aerial in 1927. Van Norman Lake up here. The San Fernando Orange Association is here, and we're right here today. But you can see most of it was in growth by 1927. A bleak aerial from 35, again, look at all the groves. And here are the packing houses, the lemon packing house and the orange packing house. It's almost like these are mines of oranges being brought to the smelter and then out to the world on the Pacific Electric. Now I'm going to talk about the San Fernando Heights Orange Association. My dad worked for the association from 1939 to 1955, and I'm fairly familiar with it. I'm going to talk about it as a way of describing the process of how oranges went from field to transportation on the railroads. This is the concrete building that was built in 35 for the association. Originally, the interior was painted in pink and green because it was supposed to make the employees feel relaxed, but it didn't really work. You'll notice that there's a Pacific Electric boxcar there waiting to get packed with oranges. This is an aerial photograph of it in 1930. This is before the concrete packing house was built. Here's the long original packing house and the Pacific Electric coming to get it. This area right here is called Pico Court. It's a result of an initiative by Sunkist in the teens and 20s to upgrade housing for primarily Mexican laborers in the citrus industry. Before this initiative, most of those laborers had been living in shantytowns next to rivers or washes, and Sunkist believed that if they were happier and had a better housing, they would be happier and better workers, and so they built Pico Court around 1923. Here's the only picture I know of Pico Court. This is from Sepulveda looking east. There was a grocery store. It was it was an orderly place. It says this is 35. Again, here's the packing house, the manager's house, Pico Court, and this is where we are right now. And the mission up here and the lemon packing houses. Okay, so let's start in the fields. In the fields, all oranges are hand-picked. The reason they're hand-picked is because if you damage the skin of an orange, it is likely to rot or develop blue mold. So all the oranges were hand-picked, nipped with a special pair of clippers close to them. They were put in the bags that are next to these guys, which had an opening on the bottom. They'd come down and they'd undo the opening and put it into the field boxes, which are here. Field boxes then, as you notice, they're marked with the Orange Association mark on the side, and then they were taken to the packing house. They could be stored on either side. There was a subterranean tunnel between the two buildings. And they waited until it was time to pack in cool, dark places on the first floor like this. Once it was time to pack, they had a very nice little elevator operation that would bring the field boxes up to the second floor and dump the oranges. They also made the boxes that were used to pack the oranges. They had their own box making machine. And this was the packing house floor. As you notice, you have these nice labels. These are the older Splendor labels. And then it started. It was primarily women working on the packing house floor. By the time oranges came to the San Fernando Valley, there were men in the 19th century, but by the 20th century, mostly it was women. The first woman would look for blemished oranges with problems, get them out. And then the good oranges were sent over to be packed. Notice that all the oranges are wrapped with paper, with tissue paper, stamped and packed into a box. One of the things that's interesting, and I've read about this a couple of times, is when photographers would go to take pictures at a packing house, they could never get a picture of the hands that weren't blurred. They were always blurred because they were moving so quickly, because they were paid by the box. That shot was in 38. What was interesting is by the 40s, the labor ethnicity had changed. It had become much more Latina. So as you see here, most of the packers are Latina. I'm not sure why that occurred. It's possible because Caucasians could get jobs in the war industry, and because of discrimination, Latinas couldn't. I don't know, but that was definitely something that happened between 1930s and the 1940s. After they were packed, they were weighed. Notice again the nice labels, the Titan labels, Splendor and Splendor. And then they were packed onto a boxcar. At that time, the Pacific Electric would come down and pick up the boxcar. Now this is in the 1950s. By the 1950s, there was no electricity so it wasn't really electric. This was a diesel engine. It's a Plymouth diesel engine that had worked on the Boulder Dam, and Pacific Electric bought it just to use on what was called the San Fernando Island, because by this time the line was cut below Chatsworth. It would then take the box cars out, take them out and go up Sepulveda and then Brand, and there was a right-of-way in the middle of Brand all the way to San Fernando. This is Sepulveda looking south. This group of commercial buildings down here is Chatsworth. And they would follow the line all the way up to San Fernando, where they would be put on a Southern Pacific train to go any place in the world, just about. We can't stop talking about the San Fernando Heights Orange Association without taking a look at some of the beautiful labels that they use. This is my favorite. This is a 1920s Splendor label. Beautiful, beautiful label. Don Fernando, which is kind of a comic label. It's got all kinds of mishmash in it, but again, it goes back to the myth of the mission and the Spanish and all that kind of stuff that people associated with California because of this exact kind of advertising. Same with this one with the Spanish-style housing. The Northridge one was a little different because it's on an angle, so it's a little bit more modern, but still, it has a mission in the background. Now I talk about my family and their association with the San Fernando Heights Orange Association. This is my family in San Fernando in the late 1930s. That's my father there and my mother Peggy. The reason my dad came to work for the San Fernando Heights Orange Association is because of this man. That's my uncle Neil Barker, was married to my Aunt Rhoda, who was my dad's sister. He had been working there. My dad had been kind of kicking around for the whole decade of the 30s because in the Depression he couldn't get a job. He was a gold miner, he was a merchant marine, but he married my mom that year in 39 and he needed to settle down because he wanted to raise a family. And my uncle convinced him that this was a way to do that. He quickly got into the whole culture of the packing house and pretty quickly rose to be a manager. And as a manager, he was involved in public relations. So this is a remote broadcast by CBS KNX of how oranges are processed that was made during the war. He also was involved in publications created by Sunkist. Now in this one, he's telling this model, I guess he's a model because he sure isn't a working man, that he can't do certain things inside of a packing house, like smoke or talk. You're not supposed to talk, but people talked anyway. It doesn't really matter. And in this one, another model is explaining to my father how a box machine works. This is my father's crew as a house manager, 1950. This is him up in the corner, all smiling. She's holding some oranges. Everything's really groovy. Now, not only did my father work. Okay, you're killing me with feedback there, kiddo. Why don't you turn it back down? Okay, can you hear? Whoa. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, quit fooling with it. It's okay. Okay. Yeah, it was fine. It's fine. Not only was my father employed by the Orange Association, we also got to live at the manager's house. This is the manager's house here. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, I hear you. I don't know what. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, turn it up a little bit. It's just I'm getting feedback if she turns it up too much. Okay, can you hear me now okay? Okay, that's good. Okay, so the manager's house is right here. When my dad moved the family into it in 1948, he immediately started building things. This line of trees right here is Chatsworth. He got my sister involved, as you can see. Built a garage, built a grape arbor. He loved that stuff. And the girls grew up. This is looking out towards the Big Tahunga. You can see the nature of the area in the late 1940s is very open, very rural. This is my sister Margaret's second birthday. Here's Pico Court is back behind this fence. The great snowfall of 1949, out and back, and pushing a big swing next to the manager's house. And then I came along. This is December 1951 when I was born. My dad is wearing his sun-kissed work shirt with Ray in orange. You can't tell there. And I'm sitting on his lap. I was baptized at the house. And my cousin and I hung out, looking out towards Columbus. And here I am, overwhelmed by the horror of it all. My mom thinks it's pretty good, but I'm not buying it for a second. I actually only included this. This is me and my cousins and my sister in pots that were actually used on battleships to make soup with, if you can believe that. My dad somehow, I don't know where he got it, but he had a tendency to get things. But the reason this is here is not because of that, but because there's the flagman's shanty right there. It's sitting over there on the other side of the adobe. My dad purloined it from the Southern Pacific in 1949, and it was our playhouse for the rest of our time with them. And just when I was starting to really enjoy being there, we moved. Let's talk some events associated with the Orange Association. First is picnics. Every year they had a picnic at Sunland Park. It was 1938. I like this group of children right in the corner here. The boys almost certainly served in the military during World War II. Maybe they got killed, who knows. And the girls, they became mothered. But right now, in this moment, they're just alive and having fun. And then there's my parents and my aunt and uncle. This was on a hard backing, and my mom wrote on it, summer 1938, before we were married, exclamation. 1942 and 1943. Someone has nicely put an arrow to my mother and to my father, but what I really like is my aunt and uncle and my cousin Stella Jean, who turned 80 last year, and her teddy bear. Fiesta were a big thing in San Fernando in the 1940s and 1950s. In the one in 1948, 200,000 people watched the parade, and that's from essentially where Brand hit Sepulveda up to San Fernando. 200,000 people, they estimated, saw the parade. Some bright person decided that the Orange Association's float should be manned by my father dressed as a Franciscan missionary. I think they did that because he was bald anyway. So he grew a beard. But a thing I like about this, my dad loved not to wear work shoes. He always loved being in his slippers, and he's in his slippers there. And he's blessing these two people. I don't know what that's all about. This is in front of the Orange Association concrete packing house. A second one, now you may recognize these ladies from the earlier photographs. They were both packers. And he's holding a eucalyptus staff. And where he found a eucalyptus staff that was that straight, I don't know. So this was the day of the parade. As I said, 200,000 people saw this parade. You can see a whole bunch of people down here. This is right across from the Memory Park waiting room, which is right over here. And you can see that the Pacific Electric track is still there on a raised bed. I can remember when it was like that before they took it out and made Brand completely walled or curb to curb. This is Dad waving from the float. And then this is the Los Angeles Police Department bagpipe band walking away, but I really like it more for the ability to see the park and the raised bed of the Pacific Electric. And the kids dressed as cowboys, which was a big thing then. And then the final thing is the San Fernando Valley Fair from 1954. Again, these were big things. This was at Devonshire Downs. You get 50, 60,000 people a day going to these things. And this is the sun-kissed display. Why they put up a display, I don't know, because every grower in the San Fernando Valley was a sun-kissed grower. But it does show my family. There's my dad, my mom, my sisters, and me looking like a Diane Arbus photograph ready to kill everybody. So the decline and fall. Let's get this over with. This is the valley in 1927, Van Norman Lake, where we are tonight, the packing house. This is 1965. Kind of takes your breath away, doesn't it? All gone. It happened kind of quickly when it happened, and it was kind of a tipping point kind of thing. From 1915 to 1945, 46, things didn't change that much. It was pretty stable. Groves, and this is a 1946 photograph. pretty much everything is still intact. There is some inroads down here. But what's really on the horizon is this area right here. Now look at this in 1952, the first big development in Granada Hills. Now between 1952 and 1954, things really went quickly. So this guy got a lot of work. It's a machine devised simply to extract orange trees. So by 1954, you're starting to see a lot of infill. The groves are going away, the houses are coming. And by 1960, you're pretty much not seeing any groves except up towards Alemany and the Mission, where some of them still exist today. So why did it happen? Well, there's 4 basic reasons why it happened. The first one is people want to live here. They came here during World War II. They said, this is a great place, doesn't snow. There's jobs in aerospace. We can live here. It's a great place. Give us a place to live. 2, there was developers who wanted to do that for them. Builders, developers, banks, all wanted to give housing to these people, make money. 3rd is property taxes. In the 60s, there wasn't Prop 13. So if one of these things moved in next door to you, your grove was taxed at the same rate as all those houses, and it killed the groves. Nowadays, you have a couple things. You got Prop 13, but you also got the Williamson Act that protects agricultural land by holding the property tax low. But that didn't exist in the 1960s, and by the time it did exist, in the 70s, this was already done. And the 4th thing is, there was a place for growers to go. If you wanted to keep growing oranges, you went up to the eastern slope of the Sierra and Tulare and Lindsay and areas like that. It's actually better land for orange cultivation than the valley. So if you wanted to stay there, you sold out, or you wanted to go there, you sold out, took your money, and went up to Tulare, which is where now most of the oranges in California are grown. So once the groves were gone, the infrastructure started to go. 1963, Pacific Electric tore up its rails. There's the Lemon Association, it was still there. There's Bob's Big Boy, I spent a lot of time there. The Orange Association packing house was basically turned over to the Republican Party after it closed in 62. And actually, Ronald Reagan made it his office for the 1966 campaign, and I actually met candidate Reagan there. My dad took me over to meet him, and the thing I remember the most about him was he was the first man I ever saw who wore makeup. And it wasn't a bad thing that he wore makeup, it was just kind of weird. You know, it's like, what's the guy wearing makeup for? It worked for him, I guess. By 1967, it was clear that the 118 was coming, and that the area of the Orange Association was doomed, and so the fire department decided to use it as kind of a place to burn. And they burned it more than once. They burned it at different times, and then they burned it again. But finally, on June 29, 1967, they finally burned it for good, and this is what's left of the concrete face of it in June 1967. And then the 118 came, and that's the way it looks today. All my childhood, everything gone underneath concrete. Mementos. What's left? What's left? So, my dad's business card. Ray Ayers, the assistant manager. That was our phone number, 361-4418, until 2010 when my parents passed away. My father's ID card to take oranges down to Port of Los Angeles to ship overseas. A part of a packing house ladder stamped with San Fernando Heights Orange Association. A toolbar or a nail caddy that's built on a field box as its bottom. But the real living remnants and mementos of the Orange Empire are actually around if you know where to look. This is 52. We're up here. But notice this nice intact grove here. Groves bounded by San Jose, Sepulveda, Burnett, and Devonshire. I grew up right here. That was First house I lived in after the packing house was right there. And then the house I lived in until I moved to college is off to the right on Blackhawk Street. In 52, the grove was intact. In 54, it was gone. And I put in red Columbus, Memory Park, and Blackhawk. But the one thing that the developer left was in each front yard, everybody got an orange tree, a Valencia orange tree. These trees have been neglected, underwatered, but still, look at the fruit that is growing on these trees 70 years later. They're a mess. Look at that. And they're full of fruit, and usually it hits the ground. But occasionally, you'll find somebody who recognizes what they have. And in that person, you can find a touch to the Orange Empire that used to exist in the northern San Fernando Valley. And that's the end.